All right, guys. So we are going to take a look at Civil War military technology and the medical issues and medical advancements they made during the Civil War. It's very, very interesting. Kind of scary with some of the stuff they do. This first photo here is one of the cannons they used. Some of the long-range cannons that could fire up to a mile. This is a picture of Atlanta after they were shelling it, just destroying the whole city. So the Union dictator had a range of up to 2 miles, and they could put it by rail. They could attach it to rail and go. This was an advantage for the Union Army because it gave them greater range and destruction power. So they could shoot from 2 miles away and hit a building and blow it up. Before the Civil War, some of the weapons they used were the smoothbore musket, which basically had a barrel. It was smoothbore. There weren't any rifling, so it was just kind of a tube. Think of it like a water pipe or something. The ball was round. It wasn't a bullet shape. So it would leave the barrel with a spin on it. It was accurate up to about 50 yards, and after that, it would go all over the place. Very crazy to try to shoot, very slow to reload, very hard to shoot at any range at all because it would just spin different ways and change directions due to friction and air currents. During the Civil War, they got a lot more advanced. So before the war, they were placed in line of 2 or 3 deep. We talked about this during the Revolution of how the English fought. Men would fire in volleys. If you recall, you remember the paper ball fight we had in class? It was that way. The men would all shoot in one time. You had to be close to fight within range, fire 1 or 2 volleys, and then you would have a bayonet, which is like a knife attached to your gun. So if this is your weapon, you'd have a knife attached, and you'd run at each other and start stabbing and poking with the bayonet on the end. That was kind of how they fought before this. Tactics changed during the Civil War. They started making advancements. They had solid shot for cannons, grape shot, which was wrapped in paper, canister shot, which was very, very effective. That's the one we talked about in class where I misidentified it. I called it grape shot. Grape shot and canister shot are very similar. Grape shot's actually wrapped in a cloth, where canister shot's an actual shell they would shoot, packed tight so it'd explode and cause more damage. This could explode a lot of times in the cannon. And they would have a shell, which is a mortar shell. They would drop in the tube and shoot up and over. You'd have chain shot. We talked about this. Michael identified it. These 2 things put in with a chain attached, and they'd shoot it about waist high down the middle of the battlefield. So these are some of the advancements they made in the Civil War. They also advanced to a rifled musket and a mini ball. Mini ball doesn't mean small. It's named after the French man who invented the mini bullet. It's the one that's bullet shaped. It looks like a bullet. So the new weapon has rifling in it. So it had a groove all the way through the barrel like this to keep the barrel or the bullet spinning properly. And then it would be shaped so it would cut through the wind. He gave the bullet the proper spin. It left the barrel spinning on an axis, so it was on plane. Instead of, it would be like this instead of spinning whichever way it wanted to, like the round ball did. Very, very accurate. You could shoot up to 200 yards with this. Their firing rate has increased. They can get 3 aim shots per minute with a mini ball, whereas it was like 1 every 2 minutes with a round ball. You no longer needed to charge with a bayonet because the advantage shifted in favor of the defender. You're farther away. You have to run farther carrying an empty gun with a knife on the end of it, and they're shooting you while you're running. 200 yards is a lot of time. Your full army combat, it's 20 to 30 seconds to run that over. And they have a time to shoot twice at you while you're running. So the defender actually has the advantage in this situation. And it causes higher casualty rates, meaning they're more accurate. They're able to hit what they aim at more. So there's a lot more people getting shot with the rifled bullets. This is what a mini ball looks like. So it's the bullet shape you think of, hollow on one end so you can pack it tight. The gunpowder would be under it, so when it exploded, it would push it all in the same direction. It does have a slow muzzle velocity, meaning it doesn't come out of the gun super, super fast. And when it hits something, it changes direction at impact. So if this is like a body, it hit, and it could go down or over or up, and it would cause tons and tons of damage it. You could shoot it off of concrete or rocks and it would ricochet, and it's soft, so it would flatten and then kind of explode when it hit something solid. When it would do that, it would pull dirt, clothing into the wounds, which would cause infection, and it would shatter bones, which all of that leads to the amputations we've talked about. Very, very lethal type of bullet they used. Some of the guns they had, the 58 caliber Springfield musket. This is a muzzle loading. And then the Harper's Ferry rifle, which was the round ones. Some other important small arms. This was developed towards the end of the war. Henry repeating rifle, 15 rounds of 44 caliber cartridges. These are the bullets we think of now. They're metal cartridges. This came out, the North had them at the end of the war. They were expensive. The North had a lot more. And it was a huge, huge, huge advantage for the North. Now they could shoot 15 times in 30 seconds to a minute, reload with metal cartridges, and shoot again. This was the rifle that won the war. Some of the other stuff we had, Sharps carbine. This was like a sniper rifle. You were able to shoot really far with it. It was very accurate. This was like a flip-up scope sight, so you could range farther. Very, very accurate gun. This gun here was converted over to metal cartridges a lot and was used as a buffalo gun a lot. They would use this to hunt buffalo. And then we have pistols. 6-shot model 1860 Colt revolver, the gun that won the West. This is what the cowboys would carry. Again, started off as the paper cartridges. They would convert it over to the metal shells that we're used to seeing. This is the gunfighter's gun. This is what they would use out west. And then we have the 8 edged weapons. We have the bayonets, which stick onto the end of your rifle. Again, these became harder to use in battles because of the longer shooting. We had swords, sabers. These were officer swords. Sabers were used by cavalry to ride the horses through and cut up people. Short swords to be able to use easier. Bowie knife, and this is called a pike and a lance. Pike with the hook on it, lance, so they could stab and throw and get an advantage. These were all used in the Civil War. Here's battlefield. I believe this is Gettysburg. Dead soldiers laying across the field. We also developed rapid fire guns. A Gatling gun was basically like this. It was a bunch of barrels attached to a middle thing, and you had a crank that you would crank it, and it would spin barrels. And you could shoot like 100 times a minute. It was just, it'd be on a wagon. It was very big and cumbersome, but you could come in, it shot very big bullets that just destroyed things. And you just spin the crank, and every time you spin it, it hit the firing pin and shoot it off. It was an invention during the Civil War. Obviously, as I explained it, you should know this was a huge advantage for the North because they had it. They would pull it up on a wagon, set it up, and just start shooting across the battlefield. And then we had the first iron-sided ships. So these are kind of how we picture boats now, the U.S. carriers and stuff, the metal boats. Before this, they were all wood. You can see cannonballs hit here, here. The Monitor and the Merrimack fought each other. Neither one was destroyed. It was kind of successful. It showed that they could last. So they protected the soldiers, difficult to damage. How did it change naval warfare forever? All of our boats are metal-sided now. It takes a lot to really damage a metal boat. Iron boats, because we had more of them in the North, actually was an advantage to us. We were able to blockade the South easier because we had boats that couldn't be damaged. And now we get into the gross, painful medical stuff. So we had anesthetics during this time. It allowed surgeons to operate with much less pain for patients, and we're going to talk about what those were here at the end. And then we had prosthetics. Any of you know what a prosthetic is? It's a fake arm or fake leg. So they had wooden legs, helped the war victims get a sense of normalcy. Many of the soldiers during the Civil War were scared to death of getting wounded. They were less afraid of dying. They didn't want to get wounded and get something amputated and make them less of who they were. So it was very, very fearful because that was the common treatment for an arm or a leg shot. Those mini balls would shatter bones, and I'll have pictures of them. Those wounded in the chest, head, or abdomen, they usually just left them on the battlefield to die because they normally weren't going to live. So if you got shot here down to the waist, you pretty much were left on the battlefield to die. If you were wounded in the arm or leg, you had a chance of survival, so they would pick you up in the battle. Basically, a big wagon with a big white painted wagon, big red plus sign on it, load you up, and they would take you to a tent for surgery. And surgery was almost always amputation. Even though the Civil War seems backwards when it comes to medical advances, they did have some advancements. First of all, they had the first hypodermic syringe, so first needles to give shots. They were used in the Civil War the first time. They advanced the ideas of field hospitals, mobile surgery units, advancement of roles of nurses. So the nurses had a big role in this. A lot of times the nurses would be the ones that sorted them out who needed amputated and who didn't. We used field hospitals and mobile surgery units like this in future wars, World War I, II, Korea, Vietnam. They were based off of the concepts used in the Civil War because the concept was good, just technology was behind. They didn't have a concept of blood or fluid-based germs. A clean surgical space had fewer problems. So they tried to keep the tents clean because it was just easier to work. They didn't realize it was blood and fluid germs. And they really didn't have a concept of the antiseptic practices. Antiseptic was treatment to clean the germs out. So they had no clue of that because they didn't know what the blood-borne or fluid-borne germs were. Amputations. Painkillers and anesthetics were available. They're usually addictive drugs, though. Morphine, opium. If you know now, we still very, very rarely give morphine because it's super addictive. You have to be allergic to the normal painkillers. I know I'm allergic to the main painkiller used in hospitals, so I end up, when I have to go, they have to give me morphine. Opium, it was so addictive, they end up, Chinese would come over and have opium dens. Opium comes from poppy flowers, poppy seeds, and it's kind of weird. Chase the dragon, they'd lay around and smoke opium all the time. And if those weren't available, it was hard liquor, whiskey, stuff like that, to pour on the wound to clean it and to drink to get you enough alcohol in you to numb the pain. These were often done outside during the day. Does anybody know why? There was no electricity. If you did it inside, you were using kerosene lanterns that were stinky, smelly, and didn't give very good light. So they needed the light. They would use a tourniquet. This is what I told you yesterday. Wrap it around, pull it as tight as you can with like a clamp, twist it through, shove something in the mouth, give you some of the morphine, opium, or whatever. Most of the time you were awake when this has happened. And then they'd use a stiff bone saw to saw through the flesh and the bone. And then they would simply throw them in a pile. It was like a pile of wood outside. This is a pile of actual amputated feet outside of a tent. This was somebody who got shot with a mini ball or a cannonball. As you can see, the damage to it caused great, great, great problems. This is a reenactment of a surgery. He's using a bone saw here to cut right above the knee because he was shot in the calf. Somebody's holding him down. These are some of the weaponry they use, or weaponry, feels like weaponry. This is some of the instruments they would use to complete their surgery. There's bone saws, there's skull saws, skull picks, clamps to open stuff, knives to cut through flesh. This big one here is the bone saw. This is an actual surgery. I'm pretty sure this guy's already deceased. So these guys are standing around for a picture acting like they're doing surgery on this body already. He's all opened up. Very gross. These are some pictures of a guy who got shot in the face. Lost his lower jaw. I know my picture's in the way, so you can't quite see the last one. I'll post this whole thing if you want to look at it. But he has a beard covering it now. So here's the bone saw. This is for arms and legs. This is a small bone saw. This would be fingers, other smaller stuff, wrist, ankles. This is a man who got shot through the cheeks, kind of shattered his cheekbone. This is some of the prosthetics they would use. They were normally made of wood. They carved to look kind of like what they were. They were very, very painful. They weren't comfortable fitting at all. So a lot of times it hurt people more to wear these. This is another type of saw. This is a chainsaw. They would basically grab it by this hand and this hand and put the blades down and pull like this to saw through it. It was for the bones that were hard to reach, up in the shoulder, hip area. This is a skull drill. They would drill this into the skull, trying to get through without hitting the brain to relieve the blood pressure in the head. It's very similar to what we use today. These knives are muscle cutters. They were very, very, very sharp, designed to cut through the muscles to get down to the tendons so you could use the saws. This is a skull cutter. It's basically kind of like an ice pick or an axe. They'd use it to cut chunks out of your skull to get into the brain. And this is a pick, bladder puncture. I don't know why they would use this. This sounds amazingly painful, but it kind of is what it is. They would use it to puncture the bladder, relieve pressure from the fluids. So basically, they would stick it up your abdomen to try to relieve fluids like for internal bleeding stuff from inside. This is the Civil War battlefield ambulance. So this is what I was talking about. Most of the time painted white, red. They'd go out, they'd pick up people, wounded soldiers. These people on both sides were never to be shot at. That was a common thing. A lot of times they would pick up Confederate or Union, it didn't matter, and take them back to operate on them, but they were never to be shot at. A lot of times there would be women helping with this also, the nurses. So during this time frame, it was a lot going on. Technological advances in the weaponry, as you saw, machine guns, better rifles, better knives, more accurate, mortar shells, inventive ways of shooting shot and stuff down the battlefield. Grenades were used. A type of napalm was used during this time frame, very vicious. And then during this, the medical advancements did take off a lot too. Keep in mind that for every one person that died in actual battle, more than 2 people died of disease and infection during the war. Medical issues were way worse than the actual battles. Foot rot, malaria from mosquitoes, yellow fever, dysentery was really big because of the rotten foods they had to eat a lot. Many soldiers, when it got hot, would get rid of their coats, get rid of their wool blankets because they were lighter. And then when it get cold, they would catch pneumonia, die. So there was a lot of issues during this time frame. So the Civil War, for as much as it benefited our country overall to end slavery and unite us, was a horrific, horrific time. Nothing you need to do with this. It might give you an idea on what you want to write about, but it's up to you. Have a great weekend. Enjoy some sunshine. It's supposed to be beautiful tomorrow. Get outside, get some light. See you guys.